Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our Friday evening halaqa. Um, Last week we spoke about three major events. We covered the conquest of Damascus, we covered the conquest of Bayt al-Maqdis, which is Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and then we spoke about the plague that took place in the Levant during the time of Umar radiallahu an in the 18th year after Hijrah. So this was a plague that took place there. And we spoke about some of the individuals that died during this event. We spoke about how some of the armies they went, or some of the troops they went to the mountaintops and resided there in a sort of quarantine until this plague finished. And we spoke about Umar radiallahu anhu's decision not to head towards those areas that had the plague there. We mentioned a hadith that was narrated by Abdurrahman ibn Auf, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just confirm. Yes, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, where he said that he heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that if you hear of the plague, do not go to the place where it is, and if you are in that place, do not leave that place. And we ended our halaqa with these three topics. Today, inshallah, I want to cover the conquest of Egypt, which includes currently mainland Egypt, which is around Cairo area, and then Alexandria, which was the capital of Egypt, and it was also a vital Byzantine city. So an Eastern Roman or Roman city at that time, in a sense, the capital of Egypt as well. But they were conquered a year apart. So Egypt was taken first, and then a year after, the city of Alexandria was conquered. And then we want to talk about, if we get to it, I think we will. Let me just make sure. Yeah, we should, inshallah, get to this. We want to talk about the assassination of Umar radiallahu an and the story that revolves around it and what took place and what led up to it. And then if we get time, we want to talk about the decision of who will be the next Khalifa. So this is, again, we're coming towards the end of Umar radiallahu an's time. Let me actually show you guys the chart. Alhamdulillah, somebody sent me the chart and I realized it was on the old videos that we did. So I went back and I screenshotted it as well. Let me see if I can screen share it. Okay. It seems like I would have to quit it and reopen Zoom to do it. Let me try this. Can you guys see my screen? Can you guys see the chart? Somebody could just, there you go. Yes, okay. And then let me just make sure it's saving this on the YouTube video as well for those that, okay, it seems like it's saving. I don't know why it gave me that message. Khair. So if you look on this timeline, the 13th year after Hijrah, Umar radiallahu anh becomes Khalifa, right? And then we have all of these things going on in different areas in different times. If you look at number 18 or 18th year after Hijrah, we spoke about this plague that took place. Now we are going here, 20th year, which is Egypt, 21st year after Hijrah, which will be Alexandria. Again, there are many other cities that are being taken or conquered or entering into the Muslim empire with okay, Jazakallah khair, sister. So somebody confirmed that it is being shared with YouTube as well. So there are many other cities at the same time that are being that are coming into the Muslim empire in a sense. And I do have some interesting maps that I'll share today to get an idea of where the Muslim borders were at the beginning of Umar radiallahu anhu's Khilafah, and then how they expanded at the end of his Khilafah. So these 10 years that we will look at. Um, and then we will, after Alexandria, we'll see how they pushed westwards towards Tripoli, which is in Libya. So in Arabic, it's Triopolis. And then after that, Umar radiallahu an passes away in the year 23 after Hijrah. So ideally, we want to cover all of these. Let's see if we can get to it or not. Bismillah. Okay, so starting with Egypt. So Umar ibn al-As radiallahu an, he spoke to Umar ibn al-Khattab and he told him about going towards Egypt. So he told him about taking his troop towards Egypt and conquering the Egyptian lands. And this is the Muslim armies that are now entering into Africa. And the Umar radiallahu an tells him, go ahead, go for it. And at that time, Egypt was an extension of the Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire. There are some sources that argue that certain governors or certain officials were representing the Sassanid Empire, but that's more of a historical discussion. What our focus will be that at this time, generally, what's almost agreed upon is that this was part of the Roman Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. Now, the governor that was sent on behalf of the Roman Empire resided in Alexandria. So Alexandria was seen as the capital. It was seen as the coastal city. It's on the Mediterranean. For those that don't know, it's at the very top of Egypt, the north of Egypt, and it sits at the Mediterranean. And it might be one of the largest cities on the Mediterranean, if not the largest city in the Mediterranean. So Umar radiallahu an agrees, and Umar ibn al-As radiallahu an, he takes his army and military and he heads towards Egypt. Umar radiallahu an also sends another army as a reinforcement in a sense, and this is led by Az-Zubayr radiallahu an, Az-Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, and that army also heads out towards Egypt. Now, once Amr ibn al-As arrives in Egypt, he speaks to the archbishop, he speaks to the patriarch of Alexandria. There's a lot of negotiations that are taking place. In Arabic, the leader of Egypt, or the leader of the Coptic church, is known as al-Muqawqis. And you know, this individual, it's said that the Prophet ﷺ wrote a letter to him during his lifetime as well. You know, some say Abu Bakr wrote to him as well, but it's known in the Sirah that the Prophet ﷺ wrote to him. A side note, that the letter that the Prophet ﷺ wrote to him, he saved it and he preserved it in a sacred place, and later on it was found in Egypt. It passed through multiple hands. Eventually, somebody sold it to one of the Ottoman sultans who bought it and preserved it. So this letter apparently is still present, this letter from the Prophet ﷺ, or was at least. I don't know if it still is, but there's a long story behind this letter, because the Muqawqis of Egypt preserved the letter when the Prophet ﷺ wrote to him. So they eventually went into negotiations. Amr ibn al-As gave him about 3 days. They asked for an extension. He gave him additional days to kind of decide whether they want to go at war or they want to enter into some sort of peace negotiations or peace treaties. Eventually, the administration that was in place by the Romans, they did not want to have a peace treaty. So they had certain battles. The representation of the Romans, so some of the elites that were present in Lower Egypt, this is around Cairo area. At that time, Cairo was not there. The city of Cairo is founded a lot later in history. The city, or the military city, you can call it, that was found at that time by Amr ibn al-As, was known as Fustat. So Fustat modern day is in Cairo, or Greater Cairo. It's a district of Cairo. Cairo is a lot larger than what it originally was. And also Fustat is a very small district. but at that time it was a garrison, it was a military city sort. So that's where Amr ibn al-As eventually settled and built a mosque as well. So they they get into certain battles with the Roman forces that are present in Egypt. Eventually, Amr radiallahu anhu's forces overtake the Roman forces and they win these battles. And then certain areas start entering into peace negotiations. The Coptics that are present there, they also want a peace treaty. They don't want to deal anything with war or battle or anything of that sort. So they agreed to make a peace treaty with Umar radiallahu an, because the Umar radiallahu an, Umar is the military leader, Umar is the Khalifa. Umar writes to Umar telling him that, well, they want to enter into a peace negotiation. These are some of the terms that they're suggesting. So Umar writes back. And when he writes back, this is the transcript of what he writes. And again, I won't read the whole thing, but we can take bits and pieces from it. In the name of Allah, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, this is the security which Amr ibn al-As gives to the people of Egypt. Over their lives, religion, churches, crosses, sea. So if you notice, like some of these protections that are being granted are similar to some of the protections that were being granted to the people of Al-Quds, of Jerusalem at that time, in terms of their crosses, the protection of churches, the protection of their religion, their land, their sea. There will be no interference in any of this, or nor will there be anything taken away from them as well. The Nubians will not live with them. In return for all of this, the people of Egypt will pay a jizya if they agree to this peace accord. If the river Nile does not reach its limit or reaches its limit, there is a full harvest. The jizya shall be this amount. If it doesn't, then there will be no jizya. So there's an entire amount that's calculated based off of what they're able to produce. And then it stipulates certain aspects that if a group decides not to pay the jizya, then they will no longer be provided the protection. So the concept or the idea of jizya, one of the main purposes is that the lands will be protected. So we saw this in the previous halaqas as well, where when the Muslim army was not able to protect certain cities and they had to fall back, they returned the jizya because they weren't able to fulfill their end out of the circumstances. So they weren't allowed to take the jizya from the people, and they returned this money that they took from them. And then it says, if any of the Romans or Nubians join them in peace, then the agreement, they'll have the same privileges as the people of Egypt. This is generally referring to the Coptics, so the main population of Egypt at the time. I'm just trying to see if there's something different that we can take. If not, it's just a longer agreement. Okay, so it's a very similar agreement to what was given in Quds. Obviously, the terms are a little more narrowed, especially in terms of the relations between the Nubians, the Romans, the Copts that are present, because that's very specific to that region. Now, it's mentioned that at this time, the jizya amount that was set for Egypt was 1,250,000 dinars in today's worth. And it was said that given the population of Egypt at that time, that's approximately 1/10 of a dinar per person, or a little more. So that's an approximate calculation of how much each person had to pay. So then the Muslims eventually, they went and settled in Fustat, where Amr ibn al-As built the masjid that's there. And this was the first masjid that's built in Egypt. Does anybody know if this is the first or the oldest masjid in Africa? I'm trying to share a picture with you guys. It's a very beautiful masjid, so I'm just trying to share a picture. Hopefully you guys can see it. This is Masjid Amr ibn al-As. It's in one of the outskirts of Cairo, known as Fustat. Fustat is the city that was founded by Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anh when he conquered Egypt. This is the masjid. Anybody know if this is the oldest slash first? Anybody want to take a guess? No. Okay. So that answer is correct. Do you know which masjid is the oldest? Yes, correct. That's correct. In Eritrea. So the masjid that was in, or if you remember during the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, the first migration takes place to Abyssinia. And the Muslims that go there, they build a place of worship, a masjid there that still is present till this day in Eritrea. And at that time, Habasha, or the kingdom of Aksum, I believe it was, um, which is modern day Ethiopia and the surrounding areas. Obviously, the borders are not exactly the same. That masjid is the oldest in Africa, and it's debated whether that's actually the first masjid built by Muslims. Because the other option is Masjid al Quba, which the Prophet ﷺ built in the outskirts of Medina. However, the Abyssinian Hijra takes place first. So that might be the first one. It's contested. There's a slight difference of opinion on the issue. All right. So that picture I sent you or shared with you is Masjid Amr ibn al-As. Now, it takes about 1 year to also conquer Alexandria. Alexandria is a fortified city. It's the Roman stronghold of the Egyptian kind of peninsula or the Egyptian area. And as Amr ibn al-As won in the battles in the rest of Egypt, the elite we were talking about, they fled to Alexandria. So they all went to Alexandria and they stayed there. But eventually, Amar's army reached Alexandria. And eventually, Alexandria, there was negotiations there as well. There was, a discussion on whether they would be willing to agree to the same peace treaty the rest of Egypt did. They didn't agree. And Alexandria was taken by force. Now, there was an issue that arose during this time. The Coptic Christians in the rural areas of surrounding Alexandria came to Amr ibn al-As and the Muslim army at the time, and they said that a lot of our possessions, they were confiscated by the Romans. So we weren't part of this battle. We weren't part of this fight between you and the Romans, but they confiscated a lot of our property. So Amr radiallahu an allowed all of their property to be returned as long as they can prove that this is their property. He would return it to them. And the rest of the Roman elite that were left, they went to uh, Constantinople, so modern day Istanbul. So they fled to the capital. Um, and then Muqawqis, who was the leader of the Coptics at that time, he was still in charge and he would be consulted on many matters regarding Egypt as well. So he was left as the head of the people and he would be consulted. Now, this is important, right? There's a concept as Muslims are taking these different cities when they are negotiating peace with them, they don't change, for the most part, they don't change the administrative process of that city, nor do they usually change the structure. So Umar radiallahu anh, for example, would appoint governors that would manage the affairs. But a lot of the day-to-day and a lot of the court systems and a lot of the administrative systems that are in place in these cities that the Muslims are taking, they remain the same for a very long time. Until eventually Islamic law starts developing a lot more and getting a lot more sophisticated in that way to deal with problems of larger cities and to deal with structural issues that are present in these cities. But for the most part, a lot of the administrative aspects of these cities, they remain the same. And even as you can see here in Egypt, Muqawqis was left in charge of the Coptics and as the leader of his people and was consulted on the affairs of Egypt as well. Okay. Now, after taking Alexandria, the Muslims started pushing more east. So with the taking of Alexandria, that's pretty much the last major city that was taken by Umar radiallahu an, or during Umar radiallahu an's time. That was the last major city. It was a very important stronghold for the Romans at the time, and majority of the battles between the Romans and the Muslims at the time during Umar radiallahu an's Khilafah ended with this. Although they did push eastward, so they went into Libya as well during Umar radiallahu an's Khilafah, and they took the city of Tripoli, which is in modern day Libya as well. So if you get to Alexandria, which is at the top of Egypt, you push eastwards until you get to Libya and that region. So they did take Tripoli during the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anh. And this is now reaching the year 22 after Hijrah, so the city of Tripoli. Now coming on to the 23rd year of Hijrah, which is the year that Umar radiallahu anh is not fully assassinated because he doesn't die on the spot, but there's an assassination attempt and that leads to his death. So he passes away in this year. But this is also the year that he does pilgrimage. So he performs the pilgrimage during this year. And it's mentioned that on the way back from his pilgrimage, or a certain time during the pilgrimage, Umar radiallahu an is seen making this dua. He says, "Oh Allah, I have grown old. My strength has weakened. The people under my care have become scattered," right? They're all over the place. The land is vast. "Take me in death before I commit any act of neglect or heedlessness." Then he returned to Medina. So this is a dua that was recorded by Umar radiallahu an during this time. This is the last Hajj that he does in the year 23rd after Hijrah. This is also the last year of his life. Now, the story of Umar radiallahu an's assassination is recorded in many hadith books. So it's recorded in Bukhari and in Sahih Muslim, some aspects of it as well. And not only pertaining to his assassination, but also in regards to the selection of the next leader. So this is what we will discuss now, inshallah. Before we do that, there's some of the companions' names that I wanted to mention who passed away during the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anh. Just a few of the companions that we'll mention. These are some of the notable names, maybe. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh's father passes away during this time. Again, this is in the entire 10 years, so it's not specifically on a certain day. Sa'ad ibn Ubadah passes away during this time. Utbah bin Ghazwan al-Hadrami passes away, or Al-Ala ibn al-Hadrami passes away during this time. Let me see. Okay, Ibn Maktoum passes away during this time. So does anybody know who Ibn Maktoum is? Very interesting companion of the Prophet ﷺ. He's known for multiple things. So he is one of the mu'addins of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ had two famous mu'addins. One of them, everybody knows the name, Bilal radiallahu anh. The other one is Ibn Maktoum. And Ibn Maktoum was actually a blind individual. So he was the mu'addin, he was blind. And also it's mentioned that he is the person in the story of Surah Abasa. So Abasa wa Tawalla, when the Prophet ﷺ was discussing with one of the chiefs of Quraysh, Walid. And he was, in negotiation and trying to convince Walid. And this blind person comes and asks the Prophet ﷺ, kind of a question. And the Prophet ﷺ is like, I'm busy right now. He's in this intense conversation. So he ignores him in a sense. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals this ayah, instructing the Prophet ﷺ, or kind of guiding the Prophet ﷺ towards the correct way to handle the situation, telling him that what you did was wrong. And he says, Abasa wa tawalla, he turned away when the blind person came to him, and ja'ahu al-a'ma, right, when the blind individual came to him. He frowned, that's what it means, he frowned and he turned away. So, that's a different story, but that's, many mufassirin say that is referring to this individual, this companion of the Prophet ﷺ. The other muaddin also passed away during the time of Umar radiallahu an. Bilal radiallahu an passed away during the time of, or during the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu an. Or at least I'm sure. I'm not 100% sure. Let me confirm that. Surah Abasa. Somebody asked a question. What surah is that? Surah Abasa. It's in the 30th juz. It's the third surah of the 30th juz. So if you go to the 30th juz, the first surah is Surah Naba, the second surah is Surah Nazi'at, the third surah is Surah Abasa. You can find it there. Let me see if I can find Bilal's name, just to confirm if he passed away during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu as well. Okay, I don't see his name here, so let me retract that statement until it's confirmed that Bilal radiallahu anhu passed away during this time, because I'm not sure. Yeah, he did. So got confirmation. His name is there. I had a feeling he passed away during this time, but I wanted to make sure before I give you, wrong information on it. So he did. He passed away during this time, Bilal radiallahu anhu. So both of the muaddins of the Prophet passed away during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu. All right, and there's a long list of companions. Khalid ibn Walid also passed away during this time. There's many companions that passed away during this time. Now, what's interesting is Umar radiallahu an, although some of the companions, and we'll be discussing this in our Islamic law class as well, spread out in the Muslim empire, Umar radiallahu an encouraged majority of the companions to stay in Medina. So one of the things that he wanted was, he wanted people around him in Medina that he can consult on the religious issues. So he encouraged many of the companions to stay. Although a lot of the companions did travel to different cities and they taught in those cities. So, but in comparison, Medina had by far a lot more companions than everywhere else, by far. And this was a policy or a kind of instruction of Umar radiallahu anhu, that he wanted the companions to stay there for consultation. All right. So let's talk about the events leading up to the assassination of Umar radiallahu anhu. So it's mentioned in a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. Let me start with here. Okay, instead of narrating the hadith, I'll paraphrase the hadith. So this hadith is narrated by Amr ibn Maymun. Ibn Maymun recorded in Sahih al-Bukhari that he was very close to Umar radiallahu anhu. He was standing very close to Umar radiallahu anhu. And he says that between me and Umar, there was nobody but Abdullah ibn Abbas when this took place. So it was the morning prayer, right? And I'm going to paraphrase this hadith just to give you guys, full clarification, and also different narrations together into the story of the events that lead up to this. So Umar radiallahu an is leading Salatul Fajr. He's leading Salatul Fajr, and it's his normal habit to walk through the prayer lines, make sure all the rows are straight, right? And then he'll go up and he'll begin and say Allahu Akbar, and he'll begin. Now, this narration in Sahih al-Bukhari says that he would usually recite Surah Yusuf, An-Nahl, or some surah in that length in the first rak'ah. Now, as Umar radiallahu an he says Allahu Akbar, people or the companions that are in the front, they hear Umar radiallahu an screaming that, this guy stabbed me, or some narrations mention that he ate me, some narrations mention that this dog stabbed me. So he yells something and they're not sure what it is. And as he yells, he pulls up Abdurrahman ibn Auf, one of the companions, in his place to lead the prayer. So there's a lot of things that we will unpack here, but he pulls a companion up to lead. What happens is this individual, this Persian individual by the name of Abu Lu'lu'a, he was a what's known as Majus, which is Persian, and he's not Muslim, obviously, but he was in Medina. He's an artisan. He's very well known to be a great craftsman. right? So he makes and designs and molds things with his hands or whatnot. He comes inside the masjid, and he starts making his way, rushing towards the front, towards Umar radiallahu anh to stab him. But before he gets to Umar radiallahu anh, he stabs everybody in his way. So he stabs about 13 people. 7 of these individuals pass away as well. So these people are praying Salatul Fajr. This guy comes running in and he starts like stabbing people to get to Umar. He eventually gets to Umar and he stabs Umar as well. And like I said, he stabbed about approximately 13 people. 7 of these people pass away as well. Umar radiallahu anh gets stabbed as well. And as he gets stabbed, he says something, makes a noise, but he pulls somebody up for prayer. Now, the hadith mentions that they actually finish their prayer, right? So they complete their prayer, which is very interesting, right? There's, like I said, there's a lot to unpack, which is interesting in the sense of how they valued their prayer, right? That Umar radiallahu anh is stabbed. These people are stabbed. There's this entire commotion, but he consciously pulls somebody up to continue the prayer. Abdurrahman ibn Auf, the companion of the Prophet ﷺ, is pulled up to continue the prayer. And they continue it. And the narration mentions that Abdurrahman ibn Auf makes the prayer short. So he doesn't read anything long, but they finish the prayer. And then they discuss what happens. Now, meanwhile, while this is happening, again, these are different narratives, right? People are seeing this in the front, in the back, they can't really see this. It's mentioned that the people in the back, they don't know what's going on, but they stop hearing the voice of Umar radiallahu anh. So they start saying subhanallah, right? They think something's wrong in prayer. They don't know what's going on. Now, as this is going on, Umar radiallahu anh stabbed. One of the attendees throws his cloak on top of Abu Lu'lu'a. And as he realizes like he's caught, he's trapped, he commits suicide. So he kills himself. Eventually, when they finish the prayer, Umar radiallahu anh says, somebody stabbed me. Did you see who it is? Oh, Ibn Abbas, sorry. He says, go look for who it is, right? So they come back to him. They say it's the artisan, right? It's the they knew who the individual was. So Umar radiallahu anh asks some questions. Is it this person? And he says, what have I done wrong to this person? Like I've bestowed all these, or I ordered things in his favor, right? I granted him the things that he wanted. And one of the things that he granted him was he allowed him to come to Medina. Medina had a lot of restrictions on who can live in Medina. So one of the things that he granted this individual was the allowance that he can stay in Medina and do his work that he does. He's a carpenter as well. The main idea was to attract this sort of talent towards Medina as well. So Umar radiallahu anh is stabbed, but he doesn't die yet. And he's carried to his house, right? He's carried to his house and he's given things to drink. So first they give him, some narrations mention some sort of date water, some narrations mention water, some narrations mention then they bring him milk. So there's different narrations of exactly what the process was, but they gave him multiple things to drink. And as he's drinking, they realize like it's coming out of his stomach. So it's pouring out. Like he's been stabbed. The wounds are very deep. They're very bad. And it's mentioned that either the next day or sometime in the near future, a doctor comes and sees Umar radiallahu anh and also gives him different things to drink, trying to assess the situations, eventually telling Umar that, you probably won't survive till tomorrow. Like this is coming towards the end, give your testament of faith. This is not looking good. And as he was being taken to his house, some people were saying, "Oh, it's nothing. Like it's going to be minor." Some people were saying, "No, it's very major." There was an entire confusion that was taking place. Now, Umar radiallahu anh, so now he's in this bed. He's bedridden for these last days of his, and he calls his son Abdullah ibn Umar. So Abdullah ibn Umar, the great faqih, the great scholar of fiqh, the great companion and the well-known scholar whose voice is recorded and well-known in the scholarly circles and what remains with us as well. He calls him and he says, check my debts, see who I owe money, see what we owe. He says, after you make the calculations, he comes back with the calculations, and he comes out to about 86,000 dirhams. So he says, check the wealth of Umar's family. If you find it sufficient, pay off the debts. If you can't find it there, then check Bani Adi ibn Ka'b, right, his specific clan. If you can't find their wealth to be, if it's sufficient, use that. If it's not, ask the Quraysh, right? And then he says, don't ask anyone else. So he's adjusting his debts in a way that he knows his time is nearing and this is going to be it. And this takes place again out of nowhere, right? It's unexpected. So Umar radiallahu an, there are mentions that in his last pilgrimage, which we just discussed, which takes place in the 23rd year after Hijrah as well, that he mentions or narrates some of these stories saying that he feels that his time is up or he feels like his time is nearing. But this incident takes place out of nowhere. Abu Lu'lu'a, he just runs in, right? So he is trying to settle his debts. Then he tells his son, he says, go to Aisha radiallahu anha and ask her if ask her permission if I could be buried next to my two friends, meaning next to the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. If you recall, the Prophet ﷺ is buried in the house in a sense of Aisha, right? Right now, currently he's in Masjid Nabawi, but where that location was the house that was adjacent to the masjid at that time, which was the house of Aisha radiallahu anha. So he says, ask her permission if I can be buried next to them, meaning Abu Bakr and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's mentioned Abdullah ibn Umar, the son of Umar radiallahu an, goes to Aisha and he asks permission to enter, and then he says and asks her, he says, so Umar instructed him to say that, ask if Umar can, or Umar gives his salams, don't say Amirul Mu'mineen, don't say the leader of the believers. And he says, because, I'm no longer going to be the leader of the believers or whatnot, ask, from me, Umar ibn al-Khattab. So he says, Umar radiallahu an asks permission if he can be buried by his two friends. So she responds and says that I wanted this specific spot for myself, but I will certainly give preference to him over myself, right? So he returns to Umar radiallahu an, and Umar says, lift me up. And he raises Umar radiallahu an up, and he says, what reply have you come to me with? And he says, O leader of the believers, you have been granted the permission. So Aisha radiallahu an gave you permission that you will be buried there. And he says, nothing is as important to me as this, right? And he says, when I pass away, carry me there. Greet Aisha radiallahu an and say Umar ibn al-Khattab seeks permission to be buried with his two friends. If she gives you permission, then leave, take me to her room and bury me there next to Abu Bakr and the Prophet ﷺ. If she refuses, then bury me in the graveyard of the Muslims, Jannatul Baqi. Now it's mentioned during this time, different visitors are coming and speaking to Umar radiallahu an as well. One of them being his daughter Hafsa, al-Mu'mineen, also the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she comes and speaks to Umar radiallahu an as well. Then there's discussion and people are asking Umar radiallahu an to appoint a Khalifa, to appoint somebody that will be the Khalifa after Umar radiallahu an passes away. And he says, this is a statement of Umar, and I believe it's recorded in Sahih Muslim. He says that if I were to appoint somebody, or choose somebody, then let me actually see if I can find the narration, because there's something he says before that. Okay, there you go. He says, I wish that I share or receive from this position what is sufficient for my salvation. So they're speaking to him and they're saying that, you carried out your responsibility, this and that. He says, what I truly wish is whatever I receive from this is sufficient for my akhirah, that I've done good, I've done justice, I've done whatever is enough for me in the akhirah. And he says, if I were to appoint someone as Khalifa, then the one who was better than me did the same. So speaking about Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. So if I were to choose somebody, then the one who's better than me, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, did exactly this. This is how he appointed the Khalifa. And he says, if I were to leave without appointing a Khalifa, then the one who is superior to me did the same, meaning the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we spoke about this before. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not appoint somebody as Khalifa, as the leader. And all groups of Muslims, obviously the two major ones, Sunnis and Shias, have different viewpoints on who should have been Khalifa. The majority of Muslims, which is the Sunni tradition, views that Abu Bakr radiallahu an, given the fada'il, the closeness, the blessings, or whatnot that are mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he should have been Khalifa. But there's no explicit statement from the Prophet ﷺ that Abu Bakr is Khalifa. And originally, same thing for Ali. There's no explicit statement. However, the Shia use certain narrations to say this is an indication that Ali radiallahu anh should have been Khalifa. And that was the original split between the Sunni and the Shia. And it doesn't take place at the time of Abu Bakr. And we discussed this in detail previously. So for those that are interested in that, they can go back to the earlier halaqas. It's either the first or second or maybe even third halaqa of this series. So he says the one that was superior to me. Abdullah ibn Umar says that when he mentioned the name of the Prophet ﷺ, I knew and I realized that he's not going to appoint anybody as Khalifa. So Umar radiallahu anh, he says, Umar radiallahu anh, he says that I do not see anyone more deserving than the group that the Prophet ﷺ said, I do not see anyone more deserving than the group that the Prophet ﷺ was pleased with when he passed away. And he named 6 people as a committee, like in a sense, a Khalifa search committee, or in a sense, candidates. So 6 candidates to choose and decide from amongst themselves who will be the Khalifa. So Umar did not appoint anybody specifically. Abu Bakr, if you remember, he appointed Umar. So Abu Bakr consulted people, consulted many of the companions. What's your thought on Umar? What do you think about Umar? Give me your opinion on Umar. And he officially appoints Umar as the Khalifa. And Umar radiallahu anh, now he's on this deathbed, right? He's been stabbed. It doesn't look like he will live on a lot longer. So he appoints this committee. There are some narrations saying that this committee was appointed slightly earlier or later. The most authentic time is this time, that it's post, or the after period of when he got stabbed, or after he got stabbed. This is when he actually appointed this group of companions. So these 6 that he appointed were Ali radiallahu an, Uthman radiallahu an, Az-Zubayr radiallahu an, Sa'ad radiallahu an, Talha radiallahu an, and Abdul Rahman ibn Auf radiallahu an. Radiallahu anhum ajma'in. Those are 5. The 6th person that he appointed, part of the committee, but he said he will not have any right to that position, was his son, Abdullah ibn Umar. So he appointed 6 people as a council, right? That these people, this council will decide who will become the next Khalifa. These 5 are the candidates, and Abdullah ibn Umar will have a voice in who shall become Khalifa, but he will not have the right to the position itself. So that's what Umar radiallahu anh decided. There's another narration and other narrations actually that state that Umar radiallahu anh spoke to his son, and he said that, because some people were suggesting that he appoint his son, and he was against this. He didn't want this to become a hereditary thing. He didn't want this to become a kind of kingship, that because Abdullah ibn Umar, although Abdullah ibn Umar, this is key and this is important, Abdullah ibn Umar was extremely righteous. Abdullah ibn Umar was extremely knowledgeable. Amongst the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, probably one of the most knowledgeable. If you look at the hadith narrators, his name comes in the top 10. So he's extremely knowledgeable. His understanding of fiqh is extremely well. He's well-mannered. He's known to carry himself really well. He's loved by the people. He has all of the qualities that would be a perfect candidate, right? That would make him a perfect candidate to become the Khalifa. But Umar radiallahu anh does not want this to become a thing that people are just constantly passing down the Khilafah to their children. So he decides that, or he speaks to him and he says, look, our family was honored with one person leading the Muslims, right? And he says this honor should end in this way, that it should not become a thing. So Abdullah ibn Umar did not seek this position. And later in life, it's well known that Abdullah ibn Umar did not engage in politics or want to be a part or a position of leadership or anything of that sort for that reason. So he was very restricted in his involvement in politics. So here Abdullah is being appointed to the council itself, but he does not have the right to be elected amongst those that are selected amongst these people. So there's only five viable options that can become the Khalifa. Okay, then there's some advice that he gives. He says, whoever becomes Khalifa after me, recognize the rights of the Muhajirun, of the Ansar, right? And he mentions that, preserve their sanctity. Treat the Ansar well, as they were firmly established and assisted Islam, when it was in the beginning or in the very early stages. He says, treat the residents of the different cities well. And he keeps going on that a lot of the ethical aspects of it as well he's mentioning, in terms of the collection of wealth, in terms of exonerating some of the enemy, and so on and so forth. All right. So now we'll speak about what the council decides later in our next halaqah, inshallah. But it's mentioned that when Umar radiallahu anh passed away, they carried him to Aisha radiallahu anh's house, or that hijrah, or hijr, and they sought her permission to enter. They said, Umar ibn al-Khattab seeks your permission. She replied, you may take him inside. And they took him inside and buried him next to the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. Until this day, the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Bakr, and Umar radiallahu anh are buried right next to each other, which is all currently inside of Masjid Nabawi. All right. So now we will end with this, with the life of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. There's a question about repeating the candidates. Yes, I can repeat them. Just give me a second. All right. So these six individuals, they were Ali radiallahu an, Uthman radiallahu an. We already know how the story goes. Uthman becomes the next Khalifa, Ali becomes, spoiler alert, the fourth Khalifa. But these are the candidates at this time. Ali, Uthman, Zubayr, Sa'ad radiallahu an, Talha, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. Those are five. Ali, Uthman, Zubayr, Sa'ad, Talha, Abdul Wait. Ali, Uthman, Zubayr, Sa'ad, Talha, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. That means the council then is seven in that case, I think. Ali, Uthman, Zubayr, Sa'ad, Talha, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. That's correct. Sorry. So let me correct that then. Yeah, so it's six people that could be elected and one person that's part of it but has no right to the position. So he's part of the deliberations that will take place, and we'll see this in our next halaqah. So the people are Ali radiallahu an, Uthman radiallahu an, Az-Zubayr radiallahu an, Sa'ad, Talha, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, and Abdullah ibn Umar. And Abdullah is not part of the position itself. Let me just. Okay, now I'm going to share the maps, and we'll end with this map actually. Okay, yeah, that's correct. It's six. It's six, and then the seventh one, it doesn't technically count, or he doesn't technically count. All right, so this is the first picture I have for you guys. This is from Imam Bajuri's book. So this is the expansion of Islam at the end of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's reign as Khalifa. 13th year after Hijrah. you guys can see, it goes up to here, this green line. Everybody got to look at this. So as you can see, Palestine, Damascus, Egypt, in this area, um, in Iraq, where they got till, right? It's not that far out. Now I will show you during the time of, or by the, this is at the beginning of Umar radiallahu anhu's Khilafah, and this is at the end of it. Okay, can you see my screen? So, can you guys see it? Or all right. So we spoke about this side here, where you see Iran, Afghanistan, right? This side here is the Sassanid Empire side. So the Muslims were fighting on one side, the Sassanid Empire, and this side here is, at that time, the Eastern Roman Empire. So what we had here was expansion on this end, where you have these cities, Baghdad, Basra, Kufa, these cities coming into Muslim hands. Over here, you have Jerusalem in Palestine. You have Damascus up here, right? You have this, today's Halaqa, we spoke about entry into right here, Egypt, Cairo. From Cairo, they went up to Alexandria, Scandaria, which is on the Mediterranean Sea. Then from here, they pushed eastward towards Tripoli. And this is where pretty much it ended in Umar radiallahu anhu's Khilafah, this area. Okay. And thanks for whoever asked that question about repeating the candidates, because that allowed me to correct the number. So it is 6. The 7th one is not part of the council. The council is just considered the 6th that will be nominated. So Jazakallah khair for that. Any questions? Let me turn the